Hello, friends. Dave Bjork here, lung cancer survivor, patient advocate, and yes, I'm the research evangelist. And welcome to the Research Evangelist podcast, coming to you as always from just outside of Boston. You know, the Greek meaning of evangelist is bringing the good news. And I like to think that I'm bringing the good news in cancer research and care by interviewing people in life sciences who are doing amazing work. I call them brilliant but not famous. And well, the not famous part is ironic because they're all well known and respected in their field by their peers and the communities that they serve. But my next door neighbor probably will not recognize their name. But they really are brilliant and really committed to their work. And I love meeting these amazing people, sharing a little bit about them and the work they're doing, the things they're passionate about. And I also believe in serendipity. So I hope some positive things come from sharing their stories with you and to the universe. And so today I'm super excited to have on my show Lori Sakoda. And Lori is a research scientist in the Division of Research at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California, and an associate professor of health system science at the Kaiser Permanente Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine. Her research interests currently encompass identifying genetic and environmental determinants of risk and prognosis for cancer, particularly of lung cancer. Lori received her master's in public health and epidemiology from the University of California, Berkeley, and her PhD in epidemiology from the University of Washington. So, Lori, it's great to see you and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you too.
So let's start by having you tell us a little about yourself. Tell us about the younger Lori Sakoda.
Goodness. So I am someone who is born and raised in the state of Hawaii. From a Japanese American family. I spent most of my childhood there, and I basically lived there until I went away for college in California. And I did both my undergraduate and my master's training there. And then I decided to move east to take a job at the National Cancer Institute. I worked there for 5 years and then decided pretty late in sort of my life to go back to get my PhD. So I traveled across the country again to the other Washington to get my PhD. And then I was fortunate enough to land my current faculty position in the Division of Research at Kaiser Permanente, where I've been since.
That's awesome. So you traveled a long way from Hawaii to California to Washington D.C. and then back. So you've covered a lot of ground.
Gone across the country. The only place I haven't really lived is in the middle of the country. I've been on both coasts.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Minnesota, and but I've been on the East Coast for a long time. So there are some decent cities in the Midwest. There's some great cities like Chicago and Minneapolis. So maybe someday you'll at least get to visit them, but maybe not have to live there. So were there other people like growing up? Were there other people in your family that were in research or medicine that kind of inspired you?
Actually, no. And I guess you asked me about my earlier self. I think growing up, I had a big interest in science and math. I would do a lot of puzzles. Actually, I'm an only child, and so some of sort of my hobbies at that time was to do crossword puzzles and like these word search puzzles to keep me occupied. But I think, like many who may be in the lung cancer field, I've been touched by it personally when I was 16. Unfortunately, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer and died. Died when I was a teenager, and that really impacted my own life. So I decided after that I would go away to college, and I was pre-med. But after taking some certain classes, I decided, and getting some experience actually doing research, I realized that I was better suited to actually do scientific research over going into medicine. And And so that kind of laid the path. It hasn't been, as I said, a straight path necessarily in terms of getting to where I am in terms of my educational attainment, but I think the foundation of what I'm doing was laid very early on in my life
So
for
that's sort
reasons
of
that I didn't know at the time.
so that's sort of scientific thinking was, and loving science, and I personally know a lot of basic scientific researchers, and the way that they think is just it's crazy. It's like these hypotheses, and you go to the end, and it doesn't, it doesn't work, or it doesn't get the result you wanted, but you still learn from it, right? And then you go down this other path. So was it that kind of you're thinking about like picture yourself being like in a lab and like doing that kind of work versus like actually seeing patients? Was that it, or is that kind of the why you decided not to want to be a physician necessarily, or was it, or was it just simply the classes that you took that, like my son taking like organic chemistry, like it was like a game changer.
I think it was organic chemistry. I did okay, but the physics is what threw me off. Um, but beyond that, I ended up majoring in psychology, and as part of that degree, I had to do research as an undergraduate, and I think that really sparked my interest in doing more observational type research. And I had the opportunity as an undergraduate to take an epidemiology class, my first epidemiology class, with the first year medical students at the time. Because back then there weren't really very few, if any, departments of public health. Definitely not at my own college, but I think there are programs now, but at the time at the undergraduate level, there wasn't there weren't programs in public health or degrees awarded in public health. And so I kind of stumbled on it by just figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, because I wasn't on the pre-med track. I wasn't on sort of the pre-law track, or wanted to go into consulting or investment banking. That was kind of the main three areas that people at my college, so I graduated at Stanford, kind of were on in terms of their career paths. And so if you deviated from that, right, you actually had to think about what you were really wanting to do and how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Penn and the same thing. It's, in the Wharton School, there was certain paths that you mentioned investment banking or private equity or whatever. There were certain paths, and I was kind of the same. I was kind of on the outskirts on a different path, and I had to figure that out. So, what was it that you loved about epidemiology?
I think for me, it was just, I mean, it's basically the study of disease patterns and what causes underlying diseases. And you tend to be more of like an investigator, a detective, right, in trying to find clues about the underpinnings of disease, specifically in this case, for me, cancer and lung cancer. And you go about it by, either asking individuals about their lifestyle and their behavior, or you collect blood and other types of specimens to look at molecular markers that may predict risk or outcomes from certain disease. And so I think the whole field was just very fascinating to me. And epidemiology is really the science of how to do the research to identify patterns and determinants of disease.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier about your father, and that had must have had a huge impact on you. And is that how if you kind of think about fast forwarding today, where you're focused on lung cancer, is that still in the back of your mind, or is that still part of, or was that a real driver for you to want to get answers to that particular disease?
Definitely, although I would say I had a broad interest in cancer when I started out. Um, Back then, I think, and to this day, the main risk factor, as we all know, is exposure to tobacco smoking. And so there didn't seem to be sort of a need to do research at that time, or at least in my mind, in this field. Plus, I think it was too close to home for me, and so I didn't really pursue research per se on lung cancer, but in the field of cancer. So my first experience in terms of doing cancer-related research was in breast and thyroid cancer.
Okay. So I'd love to hear. I always ask people in the field of research and in cancer care about mentors. Did you have mentors along your way in your training?
Definitely. As I said, I feel like the seed was planted when I was living in Hawaii before I went to college about sort of what my mission and purpose in life would be, but I didn't exactly know what that would look like. So when I graduated with my master's in public health from UC Berkeley, I really I had the opportunity to join the minority training program in cancer control research at then the Northern California Cancer Institute. It's a 5 week summer program, or 5 day, sorry, 5 day summer program, where individuals who had their masters from sort of underrepresented groups had the opportunity to actually learn more about going on to establish research careers in cancer control research, particularly in cancer disparities. So that really opened up my eyes. And through that, I actually had the opportunity to get an internship, which turned into a part time position there with an epidemiologist. And then concurrently, I had a part time position in the division of research where I work now, working with two gastroenterologists. So I saw in actually colorectal cancer screening. And so I was able to see research from someone who was trained as an epidemiologist and research more in the clinical side from someone who's trained as a physician. And so it's really sort of shaped the type of work I do and the value I see by working with people who are trained like myself, as well as physicians who are providing care to patients.
Yeah, I want to. We're going to talk more about your current work, but the last thing about your training I was curious about is going from getting your master's in public health going to going to work, going to DC and then deciding to get your PhD. What was the what was the decision like to go back to get your PhD?
Okay, so you said mentors, right? And my my decision to take the job as an epidemiologist at the National Cancer Institute was also it's also by chance. I happened to be at a conference and I saw a job posting. And when I read it, sometimes you read things and it really just resonates. And I was like, I have all these qualifications. This is something I'm very interested in. So I'm just going to apply to a government position. I had no idea, right? I grew up in Hawaii. I lived in California for my life up to that point in time. So thinking about moving across the country to take a job with the government was very sort of foreign to me.
Yeah.
Um, so I applied, and of course, back then it was, I think they still have these very structured forms. I had to fill out this form. Um, and I got an interview, and I, it was great. I met my, future boss. And she ended up hiring me, believe it or not. I was like, okay. And so I moved across the country to take a job there, working in at the National Cancer Institute in their intramural department. So I don't know if people know, but at NIH there's sort of two sort of branches. There's an intramural and extramural sort of branches, and the intramural group actually has scientists who lead their own research that is funded by the government, whereas the extramural program are scientists who actually support the portfolio of external investigators like myself. And so I got to see how research is actually done in the government. And that really shaped also my interest in going back to get my PhD. in terms of mentorship, I worked with amazing scientists there, and one of them has been an extraordinary mentor to me. She's now at Stanford University, Dr. Ensing. She strongly encouraged me to go back to get my PhD. She actually introduced me to my mentors in my PhD program at the University of Washington. That's also why I landed there. Drs. Noel Weiss and Dr. Chu Chen. And I got amazing training in both molecular and clinical epidemiology. Again, very well suited to do the type of work I do now. And so I am extremely grateful actually for the mentors I've had along the way.
That's awesome. I tell people all the time, I ask the question because I know everybody in medicine like really has these mentors, and I love that part of it because you you have mentors, and then you end up mentoring the next generation coming behind you, which I think is just fascinating to me. Right. So tell us about the the work or your role at Kaiser. I know when we talked earlier, you had mentioned that it's a little bit different than working in an academic setting. So the scientists that I know generally are like at Mass General or at academic centers that might be a little bit different than the environment that you're working. So tell us a little bit about the work or the environment at Kaiser and the group that you work with.
Sure. So at Kaiser, it's an integrative healthcare system. There is a division of research in Northern California, and actually, each of the regions of Kaiser Permanente across the country have a research department. I just happen to be in Northern California. It actually, even though I'm in a healthcare system, the way that research operates is very similar actually to an academic institution in the sense that I spend an inordinate amount of my time writing grants to get funding to support the research I do. So a very small proportion of money that is used to support research actually comes from our institution, which I think is very surprising to people because I don't work in a traditional academic setting. The other way it's different is that, at least for myself and all of my training up to when I got my faculty position at Kaiser Permanente, I was in sort of cancer centers, cancer institutes, and so you're among people who are doing research in the fields primarily of cancer. Here at the Division of Research, my colleagues include people who have a research focus in cancer, but also on other areas of health, including infectious disease, cardiovascular metabolic disease, women's and children's health. And so it just runs the full spectrum of health conditions that we do research on. And I think the one nice thing is I get to learn about other things from other people who are not necessarily working in the cancer field.
Yeah, and you also mentioned to me when we spoke that you interact with a lot of physicians in your research. Tell us about that.
So that's also the benefit of this. So the physicians in Kaiser Permanente are largely, in terms of their responsibilities, it's mainly clinical and patient care. But I have amazing colleagues who are also interested in research because as a healthcare system, we're really interested in sort of innovating and learning how to deliver better care. When I came to Kaiser Permanente, because I'm very formally trained, right, I didn't appreciate that a lot of how medicine is practiced is based on um, really expert opinion, not truly guided by actual empirical evidence sometimes. And what I realized is because we're in a large healthcare system, a very diverse one too, even though everyone has insurance, that we can actually leverage electronic health record data of the member or patient population to study some that can inform clinical guidelines and practice. It also can inform how we deliver care, like within our own setting, but also in other settings. And so, thinking about how to change care and how care is delivered is something I've also learned more about and are studying now with colleagues who are physicians. And as I said, I've been very fortunate. I have colleagues, at least in the lung cancer space, who are pulmonologists, thoracic surgeons, thoracic oncologists, and I've learned so much from them about clinical medicine. But I think it's actually really important because, as I said, we leverage our electronic health record data to answer certain questions. Sometimes you can't answer those questions, but it's understanding how that data was collected, because it's collected for clinical purposes, not for research purposes, but how to capitalize on what's there to actually do interesting research studies.
Yeah. And I know one of those doctors, I think, is Dr. Vallada, one of the people that I know. So I know how passionate he is. So I'm sure you enjoy working with him.
I know Jeff and I work a lot together.
That's awesome. Well, there's uh, one of the things that you mentioned, which I think you said people probably don't realize, and I think people don't really. And when I first started my podcast, it was to shine a light on the fact that people like you and people like academic, basic researchers have to fund their own labs. And I think that's something you could be at Dana-Farber and you're still funding your own laboratory. And I think people don't recognize that. So that brings up the importance of government support in research, but also it's like people don't recognize the fact how much work that is and how much time it takes to write a grant to try to get funding, and then there's no guarantee you're going to get it the next year, and so it's like an ongoing process. So thank you for bringing that up because I think it's really important for people to recognize that. So,
Oh, I think
so
it's important for people to know, but I also think it's important for people to know. I mean, you have a captive audience here of people who are interested in lung cancer, and I think it's pretty well known that of all the major cancers, unfortunately, lung cancer is one of the most underfunded. So when I started, my career, and when I joined Kaiser Permanente, I made the concerted decision to focus my primary research portfolio on lung cancer. I was questioned a lot about that choice, and recognizing that I would have to fund research and knowing that historically it's been more challenging to get funding to support research in lung cancer. Fortunately, I've been relatively lucky up to this time. It has taken a lot to build a portfolio in lung cancer research, but as I said, I'm not. I'm very grateful for the funding I've gotten so far to
for
do the work
sure,
I like.
for sure, I know that people like you are very grateful when you do get support. So, so Lori, we were brought together initially because of the lung cancer genetics study. And I had been approached by some people who wanted me to shine a light on that study. And I know you're a scientific advisor to the lung cancer genetics study. So first of all, let's start by if you could tell us the background for the study, and then we'll talk about how you got involved.
Sure. So the lung cancer genetics research study is a study looking at um, it's really trying to better understand the genetics of lung cancer as a way to find um, to advance our understanding about the causes underlying the disease, but also how to better treat the disease. And it is supported by the Chopra Rajiti Foundation in collaboration with 23andMe and over 20 advocacy and nonprofit and research institutions that have come together to really develop and promote this study. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to get more data to help researchers like myself learn more about the genetic underpinnings of lung cancer and to potentially find better treatments for lung cancer.
So what? How tell us how it works? How does that work with with you're an advisor, but you have all these other organizations as well, these advocacy groups and so forth. Tell us how it works.
So if someone is interested, someone who's eligible to participate in the study has to just be an adult living in the United States, years or older and have been diagnosed with lung cancer. That is who is eligible to participate in this study. The recruitment goal is 10,000 lung cancer survivors, if you will, within the next 3 years. And amazingly, when they launched the study in July of 2024, within 6 weeks, I think due to the power of community and advocacy, that they were able to recruit 1,000 patients to enroll in the study. As of mid-December, they now recruited 1,500 patients, which is amazing. And the way that someone can be involved or to participate in the study is just by going on the 23andMe website and finding the link there. They can sign up and learn more about the study, and if they're interested, they can express their interest, and they will receive a kit. So it is the 23andMe saliva kit that they would provide a specimen for and mail back, but they're also asked to complete some online surveys. Eventually, I think there's also interest in linking and collecting data from patients' clinical medical records, as well as their to get more information about their treatment and so forth. So it's a really exciting effort to really shine a light, as you say, on research in lung cancer. It was started because, unfortunately, someone in the Chopra-Wojcicki family, Susan Wojcicki, was diagnosed with lung cancer, and because of her own journey, wanted to do more and wanted to learn to actually support research in lung cancer, particularly among individuals who don't have a history of smoking. And so, because of the position she was in as the former CEO of YouTube, and her connections with her sister, who's actually the CEO of 23andMe, was able to launch this amazing effort.
Wow.
Unfortunately, she's passed away, so this is really her legacy. And I really hope that through the study, we can achieve this target. We could build this amazing resource that others can use. So once it's built, actually, any researcher from a nonprofit research institution will be able to gain access to use the data free of charge. That is the intent of how this resource is going to be used. And also, as I said, it has brought together a lot of patients, advocacy groups, nonprofits, and they have been instrumental in informing the design and use of the data. So I think that's really amazing. Often we do research studies and we don't have a champion, with you, if you will, of someone who's been touched by the disease. And I really think it helps to build a study that really addresses the concerns of the community.
Yeah, and it really builds community because of all the groups that are actively involved. So it's the eligibility. You said anybody that's been diagnosed with lung cancer. So it doesn't. It's whether stage, whether you have a history of exposure to tobacco or not.
Right. It's anyone who's been diagnosed with lung cancer is eligible to participate in the study. The only restriction is, age, 18 and older, but lung cancer tends to affect individuals at an older age. And they have to live in the United States. Those are the only restrictions. And so,
Okay.
if anyone's listening and they know of someone who is eligible and would be interested in participating in research, please check out the website on the 23andMe page
Okay.
for the lung cancer genetic study.
Yeah. So just go to 23andMe website and it'll be visible there so they can find out information about it.
Sure. Sure. And if you want, I can provide the URL and you can link it when you publish this podcast,
Yeah, for
perhaps.
sure. Okay. That sounds great. Um, so that's really important work. So thank you for, your participation and and advocacy for that project. So now, other research, I know you're interested in sort of this early screening, early stage sort of research, but you mentioned that you're also interested in survivorship research. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I focus a lot of my research in the screening early detection space. That's where I spend most of my time and thinking. But we've been fortunate to get grants sort of in the survivorship and surveillance space now. And so the one focus more on survivorship is actually trying to understand the survivorship needs of individuals who've had what we've defined as a durable response to immune checkpoint inhibitors. As you know, those types of drugs are relatively new in terms of their treatment for lung and other cancers. They've sort of revolutionized in some ways how we treat cancer along with targeted therapies. And because they're relatively new, we don't know about a lot about the survivorship needs of those who actually have responded to ICI treatment. And so this particular project is focused on that to learn more about why people respond to immune checkpoint inhibitors, and if they do respond, what types of needs do they have in terms of social social support, for example, diet, how they manage their diet, their physical activity. Those are the things that we are studying as part of this project. In terms of surveillance, I'm also really excited that we're going to launch a study actually this year to look at how to better optimize surveillance for lung cancer after someone has undergone surgical resection for early stage disease. As you may know, we the guidelines recommend doing surveillance for recurrence or a new primary of lung cancer using CT imaging every 6 months for the first 2 years and then annually thereafter. And we don't know a lot about sort of the benefits and harms of doing that and how of following those guidelines. And I think we can do a better job at optimizing the strategies for surveillance after someone has undergone surgical resection. And so we're using the actual CT images to get information from them to help hopefully develop new strategies of who to identify patients who should undergo maybe more intensive surveillance versus those who don't need to because they're at less risk for developing a recurrence or another lung primary in the future.
Yeah. Wow, you're across the spectrum. You're very busy. I'm sure that you're very busy.
Very busy, but it's all very exciting.
It is.
And hopefully, we can get more people interested in doing research in lung cancer because there are a lot of unanswered questions now. Just with screening is relatively new. It came, was recommended in 2013 based on the results of the national lung screening trial. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of screening. As you also know, screening is currently recommended for people with a history of tobacco use, but we know that there are other people who don't qualify for screening that do develop lung cancer, and there is a growing interest in trying to identify the risk factors for individuals without a history of tobacco use or exposure.
Yeah, I love
So
the
we're doing
direction.
some work. Yeah, we're doing some work in that area too.
Yeah. I mean, I love the direction where that's going. I think, all of us in this community are frustrated by the low levels of actual participation in screening. In particular in California is one of the lowest from what I've heard. And it's amazing to me. When I first heard that, when Dr. Amy Cummings from UCLA told me that the screening rate for eligible people in California is 1%. 1%. I'm like, one out of 100 people who are eligible to get a low dose CT scan are actually getting a CT scan. That's crazy. So all of us want, that to improve those rates, whether it's for the ones that are eligible or for identifying risk factors for getting screening for, the other people, who don't qualify for the current guidelines. So I appreciate that work that you're doing because it's really so important. So Lori, it's really really so great to speak with you, and I would love to ask you the last question I always ask people. Outside of work, tell us something that you're passionate about or something that people may not know about you.
Sure. That's a very interesting question. So we were talking about community, and I think it's important to have a sort of strong sense of community outside of work, just to disengage. Because as we've talked, I spent a lot of time writing grants, thinking about how to conduct research, and you need an outlet, right, outside of work. And so within the last year, I have what I call my step community. It's so I on every mostly every Sunday morning you can find me outside in Oakland, actually in a class. It's called Extreme Hip Hop Step, but that's what I do. It's actually a sort of a new version of the old step aerobics that was very popular in the 1980s. But through that exercise I get at least weekly, if not more than that, I have met some amazing people outside of work that I wouldn't have crossed paths with otherwise. And you know we're working out together, but we also hang out sometimes outside of class together. And so it's really nice to have that non-work community, if you will.
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, Lori, thank you so much for, all the work that you do for the cancer community, but specifically from my perspective, for the lung cancer community. It's all, the work that you're involved with is really important, whether it's the genetic study or the actual research that you're doing in early stage and in survivorship and all of that. So I'm really grateful for people like you. We need people like you. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Dave.